Hello everyone. Welcome to webinar 3 out of 6 in the Community Science Long Island webinar series. My name is Sally Kellogg from South Shore Estuary Reserve Office, and I will be facilitating today's SEAL webinar. The goal of the Community Science Long Island series is to highlight various community science opportunities around Long Island and how the data accumulated by the public influences local government management efforts. The Community Science webinar series is brought to you by the South Shore Estuary Reserve, CTUC, Long Island Sound Study, New York Sea Grant, and the Peconic Estuary Partnership. This year, I am excited to say we are incorporating in-person events as well. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on CTUC's website shortly after the webinar concludes. Your video and microphones are turned off, but you are free to ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you don't have a question but want to share a resource or discuss amongst the group, you are more than welcome to use the chat box. Tonight's webinar will cover seals. Did you know seals live right here on Long Island? There are 5 species of seal that can be found on Long Island. The very common Atlantic harbor and Atlantic gray, and the rare harp, hooded, and ringed seals. Seals can be found year-round, but most often in the colder weather. Unfortunately, this Saturday's seal walk is canceled due to the extreme weather conditions this week, but please feel free to make a reservation for another date. I will post the link in the chat. Seal walks are scheduled until April 14th, and there is availability for other trips. So please register using that link. Oh, perfect. Our speakers tonight are Dr. Artie Kopelman, who is one of the co-founders and president of the Coastal Research and Educational Society of Long Island, or CRESLI. He's also CRESLI's senior scientist and webmaster. Dr. Kopelman is a population ecologist whose research interests since 1987 include the study of finback, humpback, and other whales of New York and New England. Since 1995, the population dynamics of the seals of New York. Through the use of photo identification, Dr. Kopelman has been examining the site fidelity of harbor seals at Cupsog Beach Park in West Hampton Beach, New York, since 2006. In 1982, he received his PhD in biology from the Graduate School and University Center of CUNY. Dr. Kopelman was a full professor of science in the Department of Science and Mathematics at SUNY FIT and retired in July 2020 after 39 years. He is now a professor emeritus. In May 2010, Dr. Kopelman was appointed a distinguished service professor by the State University of New York Board of Trustees. Dr. Kopelman is also a lecturer at SUNY Stony Brook through the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, teaching courses pertaining to marine mammals. Our second speaker tonight is Rob DiGiovanni, who began his career in marine mammal and sea turtle rescue, rehabilitation, and research in Hampton Bays, New York, with the Okinoe's Ocean Research Foundation in 1991. Initially a volunteer on the whale watch cruises, Rob joined the staff as New York started to see an increase in seal strandings. While working with Okinoe's veterinary staff, they developed treatment protocols for responding to cold sun sea turtles. Rob was one of the founding members of the Riverhead Foundation for Marine Research and Preservation, which formed in 1996. During his 19 years leading the Riverhead Foundation, his team built the marine mammal and sea turtle rehabilitation and research facilities, tracked the nation's first rehabilitated Rizzo's dolphin, and Rob led a team that rescued oiled sea turtles from the Gulf of Mexico during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. In the summer of 2016, Rob founded the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society, or AMCs, with the mission of promoting marine conservation through action. He is the executive director and chief scientist at AMCs. During his career, Rob has responded to over 6,000 marine mammals and sea turtles and satellite tagged over 200 animals, including 4 species of sea turtles, 5 species of seals, and 3 species of dolphins. He has conducted aerial, boat, and land-based surveys for over 2 decades and serves as the lead scientist on the aerial surveys conducted by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in support of Atlantic Marine Assessment Program for Protected Species. Rob was an adjunct professor, marine mammal and sea turtle lecturer for the School of Marine and Atmospheric Science for 10 years, where he developed and taught the marine mammal and sea turtle rehabilitation and research course offered by SOMAS. So without further ado, I would like to invite our presenters to begin, and Artie will share his screen.
All right, I shall. Share. All right, hopefully you can see those seals. So maybe I should have said as well that I too began with the Okinos Foundation before moving on. Before doing marine mammal stuff, I was an insect population ecologist. So that's a whole other story. But thank you for having me here to talk to you about seals. And I want to introduce you to the seals here and just quickly what you're looking at right now. These are harbor seals. This is a female harbor seal with these, looks like these propeller scars. I've seen her at Shinnecock Bay, and this is from this October, Shinnecock Bay, and I've seen her at Cubsog Beach, and she's had those scars since 2017. And just a sense of some of the things they have to deal with. The one behind her, you can't tell for this image, but this one actually seemed to have been ligated or strangled at one point. It's gone. So the world, according to she looks a little pissed off, or maybe she's just growling. I know she's growling. So let me take you on a tour a little bit. If I get this to work. So obviously, as you realize, we don't just have seals here. We have other marine mammals. We have whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and occasionally we get visited, although not this century, by manatees who haven't read textbooks. But I do want to talk to you about seals, about pinnipeds. It's a Latin term that translates as flipper foot. These are, whoops, it's moving by itself. So we have 3 different, oh crap, sorry. So we have 3 different, 33 species in 3 groups. One group, the walrus, and they live in the Arctic and subarctic. We're not going to see them here. We have another group of the eared seals, and includes the sea lions and fur seals. They live exclusively in the Pacific Ocean, and we're not going to see them here. What we have here are members of what we call the true seals, or some folks mistakenly call them the earless seals. Globally, there are 18 species. We have essentially 4 or 5, and here they are. So the Atlantic harbor seal, at least at Cubsog Beach, makes up 99.5% of my over 31,900 seal encounters. The Atlantic gray seal, which there makes up just about, as you'll see, 0.4 something percent. And then harp seal represents 0.03%, and hooded seals, I've seen 1. And I think it's a juvenile hooded seal, 1 out of over 31,900 seal encounters. So 0.00003% or something like that. But the biggies are the harbor seal and gray seal, and then the harp seal. So the Atlantic harbor seals have this dog-like appearance. Their nostrils form a cartoon-shaped heart, which can be used to somewhat differentiate them from the gray seal. They get up to around 350 pounds for a male, 250 for a female, and they are typically found throughout much of the area around here, from September, theoretically, through May. I start to see them in October and November in most years, and yes, through May. Um, the Atlantic gray seal, I'm going through this quickly, otherwise I'd be able to give you more information. This is, the gray seals are massive, and characteristically, they've got this really long, robust snout. This is a male. Their nostrils form a W, if you will, or an H. That's one way to tell the difference. But the real difference is relative size. And a male gray seal can get up to 900 pounds, which females maybe 500. Males are darker in appearance. Females have lighter markings, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We do have Arctic seals here. Some people call them ice seals. Some people who call them pagophilic seals, which means just simply ice loving. And they're hooded seals, harp seals, and ring seals. This is a juvenile harp, a young harp seal that I photographed actually on the ocean side of Cupsog Beach back in 2019. One of, I think, a total of 11 harp seals that I've encountered there. Pinnipeds, yes, they are marine mammals, but they are tied to the land. Oh, come on. My computer's doing weird stuff again. Tied to the land or ice for several things. First of all, it's a behavior when they come out of the water. We say they haul out, and they haul out onto sandbars or rocks, sometimes reed beds, sometimes ice, sometimes on floating docks and vessels. With the exception of floating docks and vessels, haul out is associated with tides. And across all pinnipeds, it seems that haul out occurs, you can see it almost as a normal distribution or a bell-shaped curve around low tide. There are some places on Long Island where they haul out at high tide. At Cupsog Beach, and I think at Shinnecock, I know at Cupsog, they begin to haul out 3 to 3.5 hours before absolute low tide for most years. If undisturbed, they will stay out for 7 to 10 hours. But that's a very big if. Why are they hauling out? Well, they're hauling out to rest. They're hauling out maybe to adjust temperature and have some social interactions. And all pinnipeds give birth on land or on ice. Not harbor seals here typically, but they used to, but that's another story. So when they get out of the water, haul out, they're alert. They are vigilant. They've got their heads up and their tails up in what we call the banana position. Eventually, when there are enough seals, or perhaps when they don't feel the need to be vigilant, they will put their head down and go to sleep. This is a seal that I've known since 2012, I think. His name is close friends left neck because of that mark there and that mark there. So what you're saying is he's out, he's asleep. When seals sleep on land or not in the water, they can shut down both halves of their brain, just the way we sleep. They can sleep in the water. It's a behavior called bottling. They're vertical with their nostrils up. And just like whales, dolphins, porpoises, manatees, they sleep with one hemisphere asleep at a time because they need some level of consciousness so that they don't drown. So this is a bottling seal. That's the name of the behavior. And how sad is it that we name a behavior after garbage? These are bottling seals, and they look like floating bottles. In fact, once I brought an entire vessel over to what I thought was a bottling harbor seal, and it was a beer bottle. What else? When they're on land, they'll be sleeping, right? These animals are adapted to stay warm. They might um, overheat. Now, if you're a seal and you're overheat, how do you cool off? Well, one way is to jump back into the water. The other way is this. You spread your hind flippers. There's no blubber, so blubber is the insulator. No blubber on flippers. The hind flippers are loaded with blood vessels, so they act like thermal windows. And this seal is actually releasing heat. Eventually, when he has, maybe he has released enough heat, it will clamp the flippers closed, bring them down. If you notice, you're not seeing seals with their flippers in the water. That's because the flippers are thermal windows. So people see seals and they think, oh, they're so cute and cuddly. This is a couple of harbor seals here, harbor seal, a harp seal, and a gray seal pup. And I'm telling you, they are not that cute and cuddly. This is a female by the name of Hammerhead Wright that I've seen again this year for her 19th consecutive year. And she is pissed off at another seal, probably a young one, trying to get into too close to her space. And what she'll do is scratch in the air or actually scratch the other seal and snarl and growl. By the way, true seals growl. Eared seals bark. We'll see her again. So these are the data I was talking about before. As of a few days ago, 31,989 aggregate seal encounters. It's not 31,989 different seals, but it's a lot. I've never seen more than 218 at once, never fewer than 0. And that only happened about 5 out of 534 observations. It's been an incredible sight, but it's gone through changes over years based upon levels of what's going on. I think you see some years where there are really high numbers and years where they're relatively low. The relatively low numbers have to do with years in which dredging was taking place. This really high one was when the marinas were shut down and there were no boats out to disturb them. So the blue values represent the overall average of the maximum number of seals hauled out over that entire season. The orange values represent what I call the undisturbed haul out. So on occasion, right, you'll see seals that are hauled out, they get spooked, or they're not hauled out when they should be. And that's what I consider disturbed. And if you remove the disturbed values, you see, in some cases, a significant difference between the average and the regular overall and the undisturbed average in some years. In others, not so much. This year has really just started, and it's not a great year so far. But what I'm doing right now, I'm involved in actually writing this stuff up. But we can see this looks like a nice linear trend through 2020, and then drop-offs. I'll figure this out someday. If you look at the distribution over the year, at least I'm looking at them from November through May, and gray harbor seals very few. In November, the numbers pick up. In December and January, February, and peak in May. Drop off in April, and then pretty much they're gone by middle May. And this is harbor seal. On several orders of magnitude lower, we're looking at gray seals. And gray seals start off low in November. They pick up steadily right through um, April and May. And this linear regression is a pretty strong one. And I think this has to do with their reproductive patterns and birthing sometime in uh, December, January, and then the pups ultimately sort of moving on into February and March. So these are the areas where our work takes place. Actually, Rob and his folks from AMCs are doing work there too, although they've got a lot more work over in Shinnecock. This is just a view of seals over at Cubsog Beach. This is a view of the areas where I've been able to collect data. So I use trained volunteers. They go through training every season to collect data, and they count seals on the haul out and collect data and put it into ArcGIS Survey 123. Anyone can be a volunteer for us if you're over the age of 18, but we have limited time for training sessions. So the training sessions for seal work is done, but next year is a different story. And these are the places where we've collected data, and they represent the places where the seals have been seen and changes over time. So I don't know how I'm doing. How am I doing with time? All right, I hope.
About 5
Yeah.
minutes.
Huh? 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm going to pop through this and show you that all of this stuff looks like I'm taking photographs in the water. When I took the photographs, there wasn't water there. So the system is changing. So the seals haul out at various places on the sandbar. I've been able to use images to photograph, to both count them and to look at individual seals. So we're looking at here 218 seals at once. This is an image that's stitched together from 14 others. I can zoom in and count, and I can also zoom in, and this is the regular resolution, and see a gray seal here and all these harbor seals, and recognize one of the seals that I've known for many years called paw print. They sometimes would use the rocks, but those rocks are now rarely exposed. I'm going to skip through this video. I apologize for time. No, I'm not. Time's sake. No, you know what? Let me just show this to you. So this is from Beach. Seals are called out. That's on the primary call out area. Secondary call out area. On the closer bar. So the seals were only once and about 12 times there on that really close sandbar. For the most part, they've been hauling out really far away, which makes it hard to do photo ID work, but I have been able to find some new ones. I have 232 in the catalog. Most of them are just seen once, but I do have two that I've seen for 19 years now, and then a whole bunch, about 45, that I've seen multiple times. I just want to introduce you to a couple. This is good old Hammerhead Right. I've seen her 109 times in 19 years. That was just from a few days ago. This is Horseshoe, who I've seen 154 times in 19 years. Here he was back in 2022. Here he was in 2009, and there he is a few weeks ago. Bat Right Lambda, paw print. This is, maybe I'll show you this one. So my work involves, again, trying to ID them based upon markings. Do you remember The Wizard of Oz, the original movie with Margaret Hamilton riding on a broomstick with a pointed hat? So I call this seal Wicked Witch Right, but take a look at Margaret Hamilton riding on a broomstick. The work continues. I would love to get people involved in looking, in at least not looking for seals, but recording information about where you see seals. I don't want you to go out and look for them specifically, because that can lead to disturbance. What I want you to do is when you see a seal or seals, gather information about where you are, when it is, what kind of seals they are, and when you get to a place where you have access to the web, you can send a report to Cresley about what you've seen, and that becomes part of this record. I think Rob has also has a reporting system, but this will help give some information. And what I'm really interested is the distribution of seals in other places along the Great South Bay. But again, we don't want you to just go out and look for seals. If you're walking around and you see one, that's great. And I will leave you with some of the new ones from the past few weeks. This one actually has Hebrew letters that look to me like Hebrew letters. That spells out a word that means sharp, I believe. And this one's just giving me the evil eye, but it's got some markings on the side of its head. This one does too. And this one actually has an upside down anchor on its right side. And there's that same one in Shinnecock. Unfortunately, this is one that I've seen now for 15 years being strangled. But that's a whole other story. Let me leave you with the fact that if you see an injured or entangled, if you see a seal, stay away. At least 150 feet. Stay away. If it looks injured or entangled, that's when you call for help. You call the New York State Stranding Hotline, 631-369-9829. Somehow that number is embedded in my brain that doesn't remember much. Or you can call the police or the bay constable. Or if you're on the water, call the Coast Guard on Channel 16. Tell them you see an injured or potentially injured seal. If they're just on the beach hanging out, resting, just leave them alone. If they look like this, by the way, this is that seal that I've seen strangled now for 14 years. And I will thank you for listening to me. And if you want to come out on trips, I've got seal walks and seal cruises, and you'll learn more. And I think I'm going to stop because I went over my 5 minutes. Thank you, folks. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll move on.
Great.
So,
we
you
have,
good?
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Artie. I have a link to Artie's to the Cresley Seal Walks and Cruises in the chat. We have a couple questions, but I'm going to hold them till the end. And Rob, we will listen to you now. Thanks.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. Artie, that's really good. It's always interesting to see how many seals we're seeing and how long you're seeing them. I think one of those animals is one that I tried to tag back in 2013.
2012, yeah.
That you
That was
constantly
Hammerhead
see.
Right.
Yeah.
You got it.
So, but once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak about seals. It's great to be able to talk about them. Artie and I both worked, as you said, back in the Okinos days. He was actually my first naturalist when I was doing whale watching. So we started out, and what we're going to talk a little bit about is some of the work that we've done in addition to the work that Artie's done. We look at not just seals at some of these haul-out sites here, but we also want to look at how are they working how are they functioning in the Northwest Atlantic, and we work with our partners up and down the coast to actually do a health assessment. But a lot of the running joke is that Artie and I started working together on the boat. I got off the boat and started doing more flying and looking up and down the coast, and Artie kind of stayed a little bit more on the boat. It's an old joke from an old movie, but I think some of the platforms that we used over the years, we've used different platforms for different types of surveys. The one that you see up here in the top left of your screen is a de Havilland Twin Otter. Some of those surveys we do with that type of an aircraft. We do them with NOAA fisheries. We go, we can go 150 to 200 miles offshore and looking at whales, dolphins, seals, and sea turtles. And then we also do a lot more coastal surveys. The plane that you see in the bottom there, bottom left, is actually a plane that New York State has. It was transferred over to um, the state troopers, and it's part Navia, and it's the plane that I actually did my first survey in back in 1993. I was working with Okinos. Our boss at the time, Sam Sadov, came to me. The person who was supposed to be flying was actually sick, and he said, you're going to fly. He goes, have you ever been in a small plane? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, you're going to fly and do a SEAL survey. And I was like, okay, what do I do? And he said, well, read the paper Payne and Seltzer from '89, who actually did some of the first aerial survey work in the region to count seals. And that's how me starting to go out and do some surveys really, really began. To give you an idea of what those surveys look like, this is just a map of some of the haul out sites that we have. I mean, we're seeing more as we go, but this map shows us New York area and then up into Narragansett Bay where we do some surveys and also up into the Cape. But the dark dots or the black dots that you see on here are actually the survey sites of Payne and Seltzer in 1989. That's how few sites that they looked at back then. You can see that that's generally expanded considerably to the point where they didn't even look where Artie has done a lot of work now looking at a large number of animals. So that's what's really exciting about this time. This time now where we're seeing more animals here is we're also able to have Artie and his group being able to be out there and document these changes as we go. So our surveys, we try to fly some of these eastern haul out sites, not because we don't like the western ones, but we kind of look at it as how do we get more index sites to understand like a decent, a high-low number, if you will. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but our questions that we want to look at is, what animals are here? What are the species composition? How are they using the region on a scale? So we've been surveying the east end of Long Island consistently since 1993. We've just introduced doing some more work up in Narragansett Bay to look at some of the seals that are occurring there. Majority of the animals that we were seeing are harbor seals. We did see the influx of gray seals. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But a key part of this is, as it was mentioned earlier, is, we worked with Okino's Ocean Research Foundation, and Okino's did stranding response. And so we were trying to look at this, or my motivation for looking at some of the occurrences of seals was to try and get an understanding of how does this relate to the wild populations and what are we seeing as far as stranding numbers and then numbers of animals that are out there. I covered most of those things on this slide. So part of this was what's here, how are they using the habitat? And then the next part of that question is what is their overall health status? Are all the animals here healthy? Are they sick? And that's a relative term. So some of the things that we do during our health assessment project, which I'll show you a little bit later, is we look at some of the basic threats that we have from strandings, but as Artie showed us a little bit earlier, the ligated seal that you've seen over time, getting information on what percentage of the animals are ligated in the area is really important information. How do these animals respond to environmental changes or even changes, as Artie mentioned earlier, with the occurrence of people going out? How are we behaving around animals the way we should so that we have minimal impacts on them? In order to understand health, we will take basic, just like if we went to the doctor, we will take blood samples, we will take whisker samples of vibrissae, because we can look at a number of things from nasal, ocular, rectal, oral swabs. We take blubber biopsy, fur, and genetics, and we can look at a number of different things. We can look at fatty acids to look at diet. We can look at disease. The recent event with avian influenza for gray seals is one of the things that we've been working on our colleagues with Tufts with, looking at it not only in stranded animals, but also looking at different populations on different haul out sites. A key part of this is something that we weren't able to do 25 years ago as much. I mean, these programs, you require a large team of people to be able to go out there and a better understanding of what's actually out there. So one of the things that was really interesting for us is that from doing our survey work and aerial survey work and some of the SEAL cruises that Artie's group and our group does, going out to Little Gull. And for those of you who don't know where Little Gull is, it's off the east end of the North Fork. So it's past Plum Island and past Great Gull. And it's this little lighthouse island that if you're ever going by on the ferry, you can see it. And you can see that we started to see gray seals observed on Little Gull Island back in 2007. We've also started to see the change where um, the first time we started to see those animals, it was only like 40 animals. And what's interesting about that is in the mid 80s or up until the late 90s, it was thought that gray seals were extubated from U.S. waters because of the bounties that were on them. And it was a researcher named Dr. Valerie Rowe who actually noticed gray seals on Muskegon Island, which is an island um, off of Cape Cod. It's just west of Nantucket. Started to see a handful of animals there. And now when you go out, I just flew a survey there a week ago on Tuesday. And you had thousands of animals that were pupping in that area. So this is actually a success story where you're starting to see these animals come back into some of those areas. In addition to that, that's when we started to also see the gray seals um, in our waters a little bit more. We also started to see them showing up a little bit earlier. So we started to see them show up in October. There was actually a group that was doing seal watches during the summer out of Greenport back when I first started AMC's in 2017 and 18, and they were actually seeing gray seals at this site down here, Fort Tyler, that we were talking about. They were swimming around there all summer. So, kind of piggybacking on what Artie said about how these animals respond to human interactions or human disturbances. Some of these animals are out in areas where we don't get a lot of human activity, so they might hang out there a little bit longer. I point out this gray seal and Fort Tyler scenario because we did see them during the summer, which was very interesting. But in all the years since '93 that I've been flying, I've always flown Fort Tyler. It's a small clump of rocks. It's really not much of anything. And the pilots used to always ask, why do I keep flying it? And I thought because someday we're going to see seals there. And, back in 2019, we did see a number of seals, even as early as September in that area. So it does look like it's another gray seal haul-out site. One of our most recent counts had over 450 animals that were there. This is just giving you an idea of some of the other sites that we've actually worked on to do our health assessment. You can see we've worked from Virginia all the way up to Maine for harbors and for grays. So depending on the site is depending on where we were working. But some of them are mixing. Already mentioned that I think it was 99.5% that you said were harbor seals, if I remember correctly, Artie.
Yes.
That, in some cases when we're doing health assessment, we do encounter the gray seals as well, and we're able to track them, and we also put satellite tags on them. So this is kind of the process by which we catch a seal. We have to, put a net out in the water. We secure the animal here. This is one of the sandbars here in Shinnecock. And one of the things that Artie mentioned earlier is about how the environment is changing and how little area you might have, and how the the bars are moving. So that really impacts how we can actually secure these animals. When we get the animals, we do have them. We put them in a net. We have to get a weight on them. We try to understand. We'll take measurements and take all of our biological samples, and then we'll put a satellite tag on. This is a gray seal that we satellite tagged, and this is a harbor seal. We also put on a flipper tag, and we also use acoustic tags that we will put on these animals. This is us working off Muskegon. This is where we go out and we put some tags on these animals, and we try to get an idea of the movements of these animals once they're weaned. We do have some plans for working with some of the older animals, but as Artie mentioned earlier, when you're looking at a 700-pound animal, I've done a good bit of work with some of our colleagues up in Canada working with adult gray seals and doing health assessments, and being able to collect and restrain a 700-pound gray seal requires considerable effort. So we're building towards some of those projects. This is a picture of what the tag looks like. It's epoxy to the fur. It'll last about a year. It'll fall off when these seals undergo a catastrophic molt. It'll actually blow their fur, and then these tags will actually come off. This is the picture of it on the harbor seal. We're often asked, do these tags bother the animal? I mean, they do get used to it. The epoxy is a two-part epoxy. Um, very rarely have we seen any negative impacts as far as it. I mean, they might not like that it's on there initially, but they get pretty accustomed to it pretty readily. Um, we were fortunate enough to collect a number of animals in 2001. This is during COVID. We worked with uh, Stony Brook and one of their vessels, and this is a seal that we released off the back of the vessel, and then we went out on a seal cruise the next day, and we saw it hauled out with the haul out site. So giving us an idea of how these animals kind of adapt. And I think here's one where uh, Christopher Farrell, Fish Guy, actually saw some of the seals that have been done. So this kind of emphasizing, as Artie said, not going out and going and do surveys, but reporting what you're seeing is really important um, to all of us because it gives us an understanding that okay, these seals are here. And the part of the story that I didn't tell about Artie seeing that animal for 19 years was that um, we did that capture work back right after Superstorm Sandy. It was one of two animals that we caught. We were able to get a satellite tag on one of them, which was, I believe, already that animal. And as soon as I got back to my office, there was an email from the company saying, "Don't deploy that tag; it won't turn on." So Artie, in his nice, sarcastic way, kept on calling me and saying, "I know where your seal is. I see it every day." um, but we actually were not able to get data from that animal because the tag didn't function properly. It does happen, but once again, knowing that that animal stayed there, knowing that these animals are coming back, is also telling us something that's very different. If you were to look at seal strandings 30 years ago, you would say that, okay, 30 years ago, if you looked at seal strandings, you'd say it's probably a harp seal, it's probably a male, and it's probably 100 centimeters. Now, when you look at strandings, you have a different diversity of those animals. Um, Meaning that you actually are starting to see more harbors and grays, which are species that Artie spoke about earlier, that we would normally see in our waters, but we're also seeing larger animals, which, as um, we pointed out, seeing gray seals show up in October is interesting because gray seals pup in December and January. So you have animals in the area when they possibly could be pupping. Um, Having harbor seals stay later in the season could also be telling you that, okay, you're going to a time when you have harbor seal pupping that could occur. And a number of years ago, on Memorial Day weekend at Smith Point Park, we had a harbor seal pup that came up, washed up on the beach. It was alive, still had the umbilical cord attached, still had high levels of bilirubin. So it was an animal that was probably only a couple of days old. So these things are probably happening here. We don't have photos of it actually happening, but we have a number of anecdotal stories where we have very small animals that are washing up on our beaches or being seen. So it's something to keep in mind because that's something that humans can really impact adversely by just changing the overall occurrence by being in the area. So all of that being said, we look at the animals are here. We have a time of year when they might be here, but where do they go and what do they do on a regular basis? And um, these are these great, very busy maps. We are doing some home range analysis with this and some reports that we've generated to look at how these animals are using different habitats. But these two maps are giving you some examples of how a number of animals that we tagged in Shinnecock Bay here, the map on the left, these animals stayed in the area, stayed a little bit offshore, went back and forth into Shinnecock Bay. One animal that we tagged, the first animal was actually a female. She left Shinnecock Bay and went down towards southern New Jersey to a haul out site that there's another researcher from Stockton College that's doing some camera work, remote sensing work there to look at that population, but was able to go down and stay down there all season until about April is when these animals start moving back up the coast, whether it be from our area here or even from the work that we were doing in Virginia. That's mostly harbor seals that we saw here. The gray seal movements, what you can see is a little bit different in the sense that many of these animals were actually tagged over here off of Muskegon, south of Cape Cod. You can see where they're hanging out. There was just a paper that we worked with the Science Center on. and Doug put out looking at how the overlap co-occurrence of fisheries and where these animals are. And so there's showing how these animals are using this habitat, but also seeing that these animals are heading all the way up to the Bay of Fundy, even out off the Scotian Shelf. All of these places are areas where seals are known to be. And although it's not on this map, I'm just giving you an example, but a little bit further north up here off of Halifax is an island called Sable Island, usually also called the Graveyard of the Atlantic, which is a 32-mile long sandbar in the middle of the Atlantic, um, where gray seals are known to be pupping, and where most of the gray seals actually during the really low times were hanging out. So these animals are moving up and down and throughout our waters on a regular basis. This is just giving you another example of how they moved up the coast from our Virginia. You know, you can see these animals moving all the way up in the spring and go all the way up off of Maine. So a couple of things that we try to do right now is try to understand what the overall population of these animals are and how they're actually functioning. How do they haul out? And what was interesting about some of the tagging data that we have, Artie mentioned it earlier that okay, I see you. So I only have 25 more minutes, is what you're telling me, right? I got you. So, um, so one of the things that Artie mentioned is they were hauling out about 3 hours before, and they could stay up 7 to 10 hours. Our paradigm that we survey under is more we go 2 hours before low tide and 2 hours after. That's our basic survey window for doing our aerial surveys for after the Payne and Seltzer work of 1989. But what we're also seeing is that these animals are spending um, time hauled out at night. And so some of the data that we get from these satellite tags will show us on the top here depth of dives. You can see these animals are diving deep. We can also see amount of time that they spent hauled out. And so one of the things that we're working on now is a correction factor so that we can look at percentage of time that these animals spent haul out, how many animals do we see, and then how does that relate to population. So we're hoping to get one more year's worth of data to be able to pull some data and get a more robust size. But just giving you an idea of some of the information that we're able to collect from these satellite tags. But most importantly, how can you help? Well, almost everything that we just talked about has occurred because someone said, hey, what's going on with these animals here? Whether it be the stranding hotline, which is this animal that's actually on the beach, and you call the hotline and say, hey, I see I have an animal, we think it's sick. Whether it be a live animal or a dead animal, if it's a dead animal, Atlantic Marine Conservation Society will respond and conduct the investigation and try to understand the cause of the mortality for any marine mammal or sea turtle that washes up dead on our beaches. New York Marine Rescue Center deals with the rehabilitation of gray seals or harbor seals or even harp seals that wash up. So if you call that hotline, you'll get whichever group is going to need to be deployed, and they'll be able to respond to the animal appropriately. So you definitely would want to put that number into your phone. Um, Big thing is wait for a response, monitor the animal from a distance. If you are this close to the animal where you can see the whole animal, you're too close. Already put it up earlier that you're supposed to stay 50 yards away. I know that's very difficult for most of us as football fans here in New York. We don't really understand what 50 yards is because we don't usually go that far as teams. But hopefully this weekend we'll make that happen. Um, so use your thumb. If you can hide the animal behind your thumb, you're far enough away from these animals. They are wild animals. They're not vicious in the sense that they're going to come after you because they have something against you, but they're wild animals. They defend themselves by biting or coming after you. If you're 50 yards away, you'll bother that animal less. If the animal's on the beach, you'll have our team come out, conduct an examination. If there's an animal there and it's far down the beach, please let us, you can mark it. Unfortunately, there's marine debris out there. You can mark where the animal is, give the group an understanding of where the animal is, a basic estimate of size, so we can assess what kind of equipment we need to do to bring out there. But as Artie said, he's seeing harp seals on the South Shore, not near the haul out sites. When I did my master's at Stony Brook, I did it on the diet of harp seals as well as satellite tracking those animals. And what we found is that harp seals spent the majority of their time offshore, usually out by the shelf break. And so they really didn't come into shore very readily. So we don't see them a lot hauled out. But when we do, it's still important for us to be able to get those data and have have you report it. So just to review, what we would do is make sure you call the stranding hotline if you see anything on the beach. I would say, Artie has a sighting um, email and a sighting site. We have sightings at amcs.org. If you see anything that you think is interesting and you wonder if someone wants to know about it, if it's definitely marine mammal or sea turtle I, related, I'm pretty sure that either one of us wants to know about it, because that's how we're going to get an understanding. So please, you're a big part of this process. Just make sure that you do give these animals a distance. Make sure you wait for a call back to say, hey, listen, this is what's going on, so we can get some real-time data. Stay 150 feet away or 50 yards, and then you can see us actually come out and do what we need to be doing. I think I did okay on time. Not too bad.
All right.
Whew.
So one of your seals was at Cupsog, right? You tagged it, and then a few weeks later at Cupsog, and then 5 months later it was 800 kilometers up it, way up into the Gulf of Maine.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We actually tagged a gray seal adult many years ago when I was at Riverhead. It actually stranded in Trenton, so up to Delaware, and our colleagues at the Marine Mammals Center in um, New Jersey brought it to our facility. By the time we released it, it was 700 pounds. We put a satellite tag on it. It was a whole process. We released it from the boat ramp at Ponquag. It kind of went the wrong way and under the bridge, and everyone's like, "You got to catch it." And I'm like, "No, it's okay. It'll be fine." Um, that animal left Shinnecock Bay, went up through Cape Cod Canal, and ended up on a bunch of rocks just south of Grand Manan Island, which is at the mouth of the Bay of
Wow.
Fundy. And
Beautiful.
what's really cool about that for us is I had just surveyed the summer before and saw those rocks and saw gray seals. They're not exposed any other time other than at low tide. So how that animal navigated and did that, I have no idea. But once again, they travel great distances, and it's kind of an interesting part. The more we study, the more we learn about how dynamic their behavior is.
We have a couple questions from the attendees. Um, Someone had said, I grew up on Long Island and never saw seals until a few years ago. I see, and this is during Artie's presentation, I see your data starts in 2009. Are they relatively new to this area?
Well, no, and yes. So, as Rob said, they've been around. Well, harbor seals have been around for something like 16 million years. I don't know about New York, but they were around. And by the 1960s, most of the harbor seals south of Maine and all of the gray seals south of Canada were wiped out because they had bounties on their skin. And they were wiped out because government bought into the BS about the seals eating all the fish, right? So they were pretty much wiped out. It wasn't until President Nixon signed the Marine Mammal Protection Act in '72 that we begin to these animals being protected from being killed or disturbed without a permit, and start to see recovery. I would say by the 1980s, we start to see them on Long Island and sort of returning to perhaps some of their other spots. But definitely by, I was leading seal walks up in Montauk in the 1990s. And then Matt Parsons, who's now one of the folks in the government at Southampton, told me about Cupside, and I went there in 2004 and actually began studying there regularly since 2006. So they were around way back, and they just started to recover after President Nixon did his thing.
Yeah, and gray seals, the recolonization of gray seals they've been found in middens remains throughout
Yeah.
around Long Island Sound. So historically, I think along those lines, one of the things I think was interesting is the stranding record that we have that goes back to 1980 with Okino. Started to see harbor seals in the 80s in a handful, 1, 2, 5, and 8. And it was the 90s that we really started to see an increase in stranded numbers. Actually, Artie and I worked on something that we never really moved on it, but it was anomalous occurrences in marine mammal strandings. And the whole premise was what becomes unusual at the beginning becomes the norm. And at that point, I wish this is beginning of computers for me. There was a reference from the Museum of Natural History about a seal that was stranded in the 1800s, but yet when you read the transcript, it says it was stranded, and we saw it looked good, and we shot it and took it in a hunt because it was a different mindset. So we've had animals here. We've actually had seals up the Hudson River now. We had seals that have been as far north as Albany. So even all around Long Island. So there is that change, but it's coming back to areas where at one point when they were in a lot larger numbers, they were here.
Thank you guys. Another question we had was already during the videos, someone had noted there was only one brown seal in the video you showed. Why was there only one brown seal?
Well, I didn't show the whole thing, but there's tremendous variation in markings, both in patterns as well as whether it's dark with light spots or light with dark spots or combination thereof. So that dark one might have been one that had just come out of the water and was wet. As they, like the ones behind me, as they dry off, they get lighter. But it might be just one that happened to have a much darker pattern in its pelage or skin and covering. Make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have three more questions or three more. One has a multi-part question. So from Kate, we have, are seals a sign of the health of our water? And are there seals only on the South Shore? Or are seals known to live in the Sound with appearances on North Shore?
So the map that we showed earlier with the haul-out sites, that there are haul-out sites all throughout Long Island Sound and in Western Long Island Sound even. Pelham Bay, there's haul-out sites. So they're all around. We've tracked some animals with our colleagues at Mystic Aquarium that were rehabilitated and released, and we've had a seal that traveled all through Long Island Sound, down through the East River. Actually, Gotham Whale is also seeing some seals south of Verrazano Bridge on Swinburne Island. So, to say that we're surrounded by seals is probably not really a.
There are a ton of them on Sandy Hook too, New Jersey, and in the Sound definitely. So they work that over in Pelham Bay. Not tremendous numbers like we get elsewhere, but they're there. And if you go to Target Rock at the right time, you'll see them. They're around. And
yeah, Fort Tyler that I mentioned earlier, and Little Gully at the mouth of Long Island Sound, and those are Fort Tyler is just north of Gardiner's Island, actually, in south of Plum Island. But those are all throughout that habitat. These animals are being seen there. What's very interesting to me, though, is that when we put a satellite tag on, they only actually signal when they're on the surface. So you get a lot more what we call hits on the data. So you'll get a lot more positions. These animals, when they travel, find all of the haul-out sites that we know, and you'll see them pop up and hang out there for a little bit, move on to the next one, move on to the next one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting, even all the way up into Fisher's Island Sound and all those areas. They go right through, and they kind of know where to hang out.
Great. Someone is also commenting that there's sounds like there's a haul outside at Oldfield Lighthouse as well.
Where? I don't know where that is. Sorry.
Is that Western? Is that is that in the area of Flax Pond? That we're
Setauket, Stony Brook area.
So here's a story where the public. So in the Flax Pond area, there's a site. We actually do seal walks out there and do beach cleanups with another not-for-profit group. And there's a handful of animals that are hanging out in those areas. And many years ago, I received a call from a woman and said, "Rob, I heard that you do surveys. Why don't you come and count our seals here?" And I'm like, "Well, because I didn't know there were any there." And she's like, "Well, I can see them from my bluff all the time." And I'm like, "Okay, well, that's kind of your house." There's also seals in Ashbroken that we've had hauled out at different times. There's
Jeff Harbor.
We just don't have a lot of data about, like, to the extent that Artie has of where these animals are. And so for our effort, we put a lot more effort into where we know there'll be larger numbers of animals to get our counts and try to get a good baseline. But we are trying to find more support so we can do more broader scale surveys to cover all of those haul out sites. But even knowing that and getting that information to us helps us put that in the hopper. Pelham Bay was a prime example. I gave lectures about what to do with strandings for many years, and it was one of the um, park rangers that called and said, "Hey, we're doing a story on the seals that are here in Pelham Bay, and we just wanted to get some information." And as we're talking, he said, "And I probably should have been reporting them to you for a while." And I'm like, "Yep, it would have been good." Because everybody looks at, we just want to report what's out there and what might be sick, and that's really only part of the the question. Really, is what's out there, and are we seeing more? And you're out there more often than we are, and you might only see one or two, but one or two is really, it's very similar to what we're seeing with whales. I mean, we're seeing a lot more animals now, but probably a lot went unreported for a long time because people just either didn't think anybody cared or not. We're here to say that people do. At the very least, we do.
This is a question for Rob. When you were discussing the aerial service, at what height do you do the aerial service?
Really good question. So we fly at 600 feet. So as I always joke with Artie, I mean, he gets some really detailed things. I don't see that kind of detail from 600 feet and 100 miles an hour. But this is an example here in this picture that's up. This is what we usually see. We can zoom in and try to get counts. We try to get count data. We're able to see some ligated seals at times from this altitude. But usually 600 feet. Some surveys are starting to be flown a little bit higher because of some of other restrictions, and we're testing some other tools that enable us to do that.
Great. We have one last question. How deep can seals dive, and how long can they stay underwater before coming up for air?
I'll take it briefly. The data, at least old data, said that harbor seals could dive to 600 meters, and it's sort of 1,800 feet. I'm sure you've got more updated data from your work. In what 20 minutes down?
Yeah, I think actually it's a really good question because we always want to know how deep they can go. The interesting part is where are they going? So they're not going to go 1,800 feet down on the shelf break, but
No.
they are going to go to the bottom. So could they go out and dive deeper? So when we look at our tagging data, if they're out over the abyssal plain, yeah, they might dive deeper if they have a need. And I'm going to jump to a sidebar from seals to the Rizzo's dolphin that we spoke of earlier. When we first rehabilitated the Rizzo's dolphin, our data suggested that they were always deep diving animals. So the first tag that was put out on that animal, we put out, and we programmed it for just deep dives. And it ended up giving us some really problematic data because the animals don't always dive deep. So they have the ability to go deep, but they don't always have to use that. And that was kind of our big lesson learned. Um, 20 minutes for a seal is pretty common. Waddell seals have been known to dive a lot longer, way beyond the anaerobic dive limit. It's what gave us some indications that these animals are more voluntary breathers and able to work in hypoxic conditions. Um, so yeah, there's a wide range depending on the species. The ones we're seeing here, usually, less than 20 minutes is our dive. Usually 3 to 8 minutes is more of a common time.
Yeah, I was just talking about harbor seals. Yeah.
Okay. I misspoke. We have one last question. Um, and it's a multi-part question. How much of an impact does commercial fishing continue to have on seals? With more limitations on catches, as well as fewer vessels heading out of traditional fishing ports, has this helped the populations? What is the impact of recreational vessels on populations?
The easy answer is we don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing question to really
Yeah.
try to get an understanding. I mean, NOAA Fisheries operates an observer program to try and look at what animals are bycaught and how that changes, and then try to um, calculate what that might mean for the population. Uh, a key thing that we need to understand, though, to measure impacts is we need to get a better understanding of what the actual population is and how that, what that relative number is, and then how has that changed, and using just back of the envelope math. I mean, if you have 100 animals and 10 are being taken in fisheries, okay, that gives you a number, but is that increasing or decreasing? Those are all the questions that these data help us answer, and understanding haul out sites and understanding how that's changed. And so just jumping down that road, I mentioned earlier that we see all the animals, or we see a majority of the animals moving north in the spring and heading back up to Maine. Um, I took part in the aerial survey, last aerial survey that was done to do a population estimate for harbor seals, which we flew from New Hampshire to the Canadian border. We surveyed about 1,100 haul out sites. So we flew and circled all of them and counted them. One of the challenges that we face is that we're trying to get an understanding of, our paradigm used to be that they all would head back up north. So we would get an idea of what's up there, what's pupping, and then that would give you, that might not be as accurate anymore, because you might have animals that are staying farther south, and therefore that means we have to look at that number a little bit more closely. And it's something that we're working on now.
I mean, we don't even really have a good understanding of the prey that harbor seals. I mean, I've seen them feed on octopus. I've seen them feed on bunker. I've seen them feed on winter flounder. But when I'm looking at them and trying to count them at haul outs, that's when they're typically not swimming and feeding, unless there's this massive amount of prey and they are opportunistic and will go get it. But I don't think we have enough information. And one of the things about trying to get the population size is that using photo ID with some mathematical manipulation, there might be a way for me to sort of make an estimate of the population that utilize Cupsog Beach. But what I can say is, I've never seen more than 218 at once. And of those, a certain percentage have been essentially marked, and how often they come back and sort of play with that. So there's a lot we don't know. And this is where the presence of seals elsewhere can help us at least get a sense of where to look. I hear stories about seal haul outs in Babylon, and I know seals. I've seen seals around Patchogue, and people tell me about seals going up the Connecticut River and hanging out on their floating docks. This is all the kind of information that even is sort of incidental. It's still important to us. So share that.
And also with the diets point that Artie was talking about, I mean, there's work that's done in the projects that we do. We try to take and do diet analysis. Has been work by Keith Hernandez to look at fatty acids for his PhD work. The key is that everything we look at, and I'm just using a very broad number. I mean, some of the early diet work, I did diet work with harp seals. There was somewhere 24 different species of fish that these animals ate. What was interesting is they tend to use a size class more so than just a certain species. So it's really what they can ingest and what's probably there. So I think that there's that kind of variability. We can then that's how we can start to understand how the habitat is being able to sustain them or not, and what animals they're feeding on. But it's bringing all of these things together, like Artie said, him knowing what's hanging out at Cupsog, us having some tags out, knowing that animals are hanging out at Cupsog, or where they go when they're not hanging out, that can help put pieces of this puzzle together. And I think we still have a long way to go, but at least we're starting to get those pieces. I mean, Artie, if correct me if I'm wrong, but 25 years ago we weren't even close to trying to get any of these. Now at least we can talk about, hey, what's out there.
Right. I think one of the other things that, in a sense, we haven't talked about, but I think would be interesting and helpful to others, is some of the issues pertaining to harp seals. Harp seals are still being killed for their skins by the Canadian. There's a hunt that is subsidized by the Canadian government, and they no longer list what they call their total allowable catch, which was often in the hundreds of thousands. Last year, 25,000 or so harp seals were killed. Their skins were taken. It's barbaric. And the Canadian government supports it because they are trying to control, and this is from their documents, there are 7 million harp seals supposedly, and they're trying to control their numbers. I was born in 1952. I have data going back to 1952 of hundreds of thousands of harp seal pups to tens of thousands of harp seal pups killed every year. They are being stressed by the hunt. They're being stressed by these are animals that give birth on the edge of the ice. The pups nurse there for 12 days, and they're drowning. Last year, thousands of harp seals, according to the data that I read, drowned because of melting of the ice. So if you want to do something to help them, maybe join with the IFAW and others in boycotting Canadian products until they stop hunting seals. And do your best to reduce individual and larger scale greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the rate at which our atmosphere is warming. That's a Herculean task, but I think it's critically important because that is the one thing that we all are facing, and particularly those animals that live on and under the ice and at the poles. We can do something. Besides helping us find out where seals are, you can do something perhaps by joining in that boycott. Good deed. Maybe I took us off topic, but I think it needed to be said.
Yeah, I think it's a good point though. Even looking at how climate does impact the
right.
Oh,
absolutely.
Many of them. I mean, you look at how the breakup of ice, the work that Gary Stenson and people from the DFO did, looking at breaking up of ice earlier, leading to more pups and coming up and stranding. I think that those are all factors that, going back to what I talked about earlier about the anomalous occurrences, is it gives us an indication of what's going on in our environment, good or bad, and then just be aware of those challenges. That
absolutely. Think, but 2010, 100% of the pups in the Gulf of harp seal pups in the Gulf of St. Lawrence drowned because of it was a combination of the North Atlantic Oscillation, which is kind of like the North Atlantic version of El Nino, and warming, anthropogenic warming. And the data that I saw, and I just saw it the other day, gave a tremendous number that drowned last year. I have to go back and try and find it, but we can hopefully make a difference.
I have, we got one more question in the chat, and then hopefully it'll be quick so we can wrap up and everyone else can return to their evenings.
What do you think those odds are, Sally?
I'm not holding my breath. It's always wonderful to listen to both of you. It really is. Oh, we have two questions. So the first quick question is, how many years have you guys been engaging in your research? How many years have you been here? Is the specific question.
I've been doing seal stuff, I guess, since '95, but at Cupsock Beach since 2004.
I started my first aerial survey in '93, and I've been in strandings since 1991. And then, all the other work just progressively. So
I see somebody ask about the infographic about seal sightings in Finger. NOAA Fisheries has it. Actually, we have it on our webpage about seals, and there's a link to the original one there about the rule of thumb, and it's a good one. Go look there.
Yeah, just on a side note with that, we're talking about looking at seals and seeing the difference in seals, even from a stranding perspective in the '90s. When we first started seeing animals wash up, we were able to walk right up to them, pick them up, and put them in a truck. And then it progressed that you had to move a little bit faster, and then actually there came a point when you were running down the beach trying to catch a seal, and that's what made us realize that there was a change in that whole evolution of what animals were here. Not every animal you see on the beach is actually sick and needs to be picked up. they might just be out doing what seals do, and give them their space.
Maybe, is it Rob? I think you had it um, in your presentation.
Yeah.
Maybe I can, when we send out our um, follow-up email, we can include that there. Oh yeah, Noah Fisheries. Okay.
Yeah, we can send it out. We'll get you a copy of that.
Yeah,
too.
great idea.
All right,
Great
excellent.
idea.
All right, I will wrap up now, and I want to say thank you to our wonderful presenters and our attendees who've stuck with us this long. Thank you all for being here. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be posted to CTEC's website shortly. For anyone interested in joining a future seal walk at Cupsog Beach, please check out the Cresley website, or you can check out AMC's as well for their own their seal cruises. And just remember to dress for the weather if you do go out on and join those. Lastly, watch your inbox to see our follow-up email with resources, and don't forget to check out our future webinars on river herring, coastal storms, and monarch butterflies. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everybody.